There's something about reconnecting with an old friend that feels comforting. Memories from a simpler time, laughter over past adventures, and catching up on all the things you've missed. These moments remind you of who you were before life became so complicated. I, Claire, was reminded of all this one rainy afternoon when my college friend, Ethan, messaged me out of the blue. Ethan and I had been inseparable during our university years. We were part of the same friend group, bonded over a love of literature and late-night study sessions. After college, life took us in different directions. He moved to Chicago for a high-powered job, while I stayed in Seattle, eventually meeting my husband Tom and starting a family. We exchanged messages now and then, but as time went on, the frequency dwindled, and we both got swept up in our separate lives. But then Ethan's message came, carrying with it a flood of nostalgia. "Hey Claire," it read. "Long time no see. I'll be in Seattle for a while and need a place to stay. Any chance you've got room for an old friend?" It was the kind of request that would have felt strange from anyone else, but with Ethan, it just felt natural. Tom and I had a guest room, and since my husband often worked long hours and our 2 kids were now both in school, the house could feel pretty empty. After talking it over with Tom, we agreed it would be nice to host Ethan for a while. When Ethan arrived, it was like no time had passed at all. He was just as I remembered him, charming, intelligent, with that same quick wit that had made us laugh back in college. We spent the first night catching up, reminiscing about old times, and laughing over shared memories. It was refreshing to have someone around who knew me from those years and shared a history that only old friends could understand. The first week went smoothly. Ethan was respectful, even helpful around the house, and he got along well with the kids. Every evening after dinner, he'd help with dishes and then join me in the living room to watch whatever show was on. It was a routine I quickly grew to enjoy, especially on the nights Tom was stuck late at the office. Ethan and I would sit on the couch talking about anything and everything, our conversations stretching long into the night. One evening, after the kids were in bed and Tom was out at a work dinner, Ethan and I found ourselves reminiscing over an old bottle of wine I'd found in the pantry. As we laughed and shared stories, I couldn't help but notice how easily the years seemed to fall away, leaving just the 2 of us, like we were back in college again. We laughed over our failed attempts at cooking together, old inside jokes, and the endless essays we'd struggled through. Somewhere between the laughter and the warmth of the wine, our conversations grew quieter, more thoughtful, and I felt an old familiarity return. It was subtle at first, a glance here, a touch there, but the feeling was undeniable. I realized Ethan had moved closer on the couch, his knee barely touching mine. My heart raced, a mixture of excitement and guilt, knowing how easily I'd slipped back into that comfort, even while married. The next day, I tried to push away the events of the previous evening, convincing myself that it was just the wine, that I was just imagining things. But that closeness lingered, not just in memory but in the way Ethan would look at me across the room or make a comment that felt loaded with meaning. I'd catch myself glancing at him too, my mind drifting back to simpler times, wondering what might have been if our paths had aligned differently. Over the next few weeks, our time together began to develop a familiar rhythm. While Tom was away at work, Ethan and I would share afternoons in the kitchen, evenings with the kids, and late nights talking over movies or music. The boundaries felt like they were blurring little by little. I'd rationalize it to myself as harmless, just 2 old friends reconnecting. But deep down, I knew the tension was growing, and it became harder to ignore. One weekend, Tom had to leave for a conference, taking the kids to their grandparents' place since they'd been begging for a visit. That left Ethan and me alone for the first time. No distractions, no interruptions. I felt a mix of excitement and anxiety as I thought about spending a whole weekend together, just the 2 of us. On Saturday morning, Ethan offered to make breakfast. I sat at the kitchen counter, watching as he moved around the kitchen effortlessly. He had this relaxed confidence about him, something I remembered from years ago but seemed more pronounced now. We laughed over pancakes, spilling batter, and reminiscing over more shared memories from our college days. After breakfast, we decided to spend the day hiking a nearby trail. The fresh air, the beautiful surroundings, and the quietude of nature created a perfect backdrop. We talked about everything under the sun, our careers, our dreams, things we hadn't dared to share with anyone else. With every step, I felt the walls I'd carefully built around my marriage slipping, giving way to something raw and unexpected. At one point, Ethan stopped, his gaze soft and searching. "You know, I missed you," he said quietly, his voice carrying a weight that went beyond simple words. "I've thought about you over the years, wondered how life would have been if we'd stayed in touch." The sincerity in his eyes left me speechless. I felt the pull between us growing stronger, and all my rationalizations about being just friends felt laughable. My heart raced as he moved a little closer, his hand finding mine. For a moment, we just stood there, the forest around us silent. And I knew there was a decision to be made. I pulled back, taking a shaky breath. "Ethan, we can't. It's too complicated. I'm married. We both know where this could lead." He nodded, a hint of sadness in his eyes. "I know. I don't want to ruin anything for you, but I can't ignore that there's something here. Something we didn't get to explore." We walked back in silence, the air between us thick with the words we didn't say. That evening, back at the house, we both tried to pretend everything was normal, but the charged atmosphere was undeniable. We avoided eye contact, both lost in thought, but as the night wore on, the silence felt more unbearable than the tension. Finally, I couldn't stand it anymore. I went to the living room where he was sitting, watching a movie. When I walked in, he looked up, his expression unreadable. I sat down next to him, and the words spilled out before I could stop myself. "Ethan, I don't know what's happening here, but I know it's dangerous. And yet, I can't seem to stop myself from wanting to be close to you." He reached out, his fingers gently brushing mine. "I don't want to put you in a difficult position, but I feel the same way. I've missed having someone who understands me, who gets me in a way no one else does." The room fell silent as we looked at each other, the weight of our emotions hanging in the air. It was like the years of unspoken feelings were finally catching up to us, demanding to be acknowledged. We were no longer just friends reconnecting. We were two people wrestling with feelings we'd buried long ago. Without thinking, I leaned in, and our lips met in a soft, tentative kiss. It was a gentle connection, a quiet acknowledgement of everything we'd felt but never voiced. When we pulled away, I could see the conflict in his eyes mirrored in my own. We spent the next morning in a state of quiet contemplation, both of us trying to process what had happened. I felt torn between guilt and exhilaration, knowing I was on the edge of something that could change everything. The rest of the weekend was a blur of mixed emotions. We'd have moments where we were laughing and talking like before, but there was a tension beneath the surface that was impossible to ignore. Every time our eyes met, it was like an unspoken reminder of that kiss, of the feelings we were trying to keep at bay. By Sunday evening, I felt like I was at my breaking point. The kids would be back soon, and Tom would return from his trip, and I knew I had to make a decision. I couldn't keep living in this emotional limbo, torn between my marriage and my feelings for Ethan. I went to Ethan, finding him in the backyard where he was watching the sunset. When he saw me, he gave a small, sad smile, as if he already knew what I was going to say. "Ethan, whatever this is, it can't continue," I said, my voice shaky but firm. "I have a family, a life that I've built with Tom. I can't throw that away." He nodded, his gaze soft and understanding. "I know. I don't want to make things harder for you. Maybe it's best if I leave, find a place of my own." The thought of him leaving filled me with a sense of loss, but I knew it was the right thing to do. We spent the rest of the evening in a comfortable silence, both of us saying our goodbyes in our own way. When he left the next day, I watched him go, feeling a mixture of relief and heartache. In the weeks that followed, I threw myself into my family, determined to move on and put the past behind me. But every now and then, I'd catch myself thinking about Ethan, wondering if he was okay, if he missed me as much as I missed him. I knew I had made the right choice, but part of me couldn't help but wonder what might have been. It was a bittersweet memory, a reminder of the road not taken. And as I moved forward with my life, I carried that memory with me, a quiet reminder of the complexities of love and friendship. In the end, I chose my family, my commitment to Tom and our life together. It wasn't easy, and there were days when I struggled with the decision, but I knew it was the right one. Sometimes the hardest choices are the ones that keep us grounded, that remind us of what truly matters. And as I watched my children play in the yard, their laughter filling the air, I felt a sense of peace, knowing that I had made the right choice, even if it had come at a cost. In the weeks following Ethan's departure, life settled back into its usual rhythm. Tom was home more often, his project winding down, and the kids filled my days with their boundless energy and laughter. On the surface, everything seemed normal, but inside, I still felt the echoes of my time with Ethan. I tried to push those memories aside, focusing on the life I had chosen, the commitments I'd made. But as anyone who's struggled with unspoken feelings knows, moving on is often easier said than done. One evening, as Tom and I sat on the porch watching the sunset, he turned to me with a thoughtful look. "I've noticed you've been a bit distant lately," he said, his voice gentle. "Is everything okay?" For a brief moment, I felt panic rise in my chest. Had he noticed the emotional turmoil I'd been dealing with, the lingering guilt? But his gaze was filled with kindness, not suspicion, and I realized he was genuinely concerned. "I'm fine," I replied, managing a smile. "Just adjusting, I guess. It's been a busy time with you traveling so much, and the kids, well, they keep me on my toes." He nodded, reaching out to take my hand. "I know I haven't been around as much lately, and I'm sorry about that. I've missed this, just being here with you." The sincerity in his voice brought a wave of guilt, a reminder of why I had chosen to put my family first. I gave his hand a reassuring squeeze, my heart settling a little as I let go of the lingering regret. As the days turned into months, the memory of Ethan faded, replaced by the everyday moments that made up our family life. There were school projects to tackle, weekend picnics, and quiet evenings with Tom, where we'd talk about everything and nothing. Little by little, I found myself embracing the life we'd built, grateful for the stability, the love that had been there all along. Occasionally, I'd hear from Ethan, a casual text checking in, asking how I was. His messages were always friendly, respectful, and it comforted me to know that he, too, had found peace in the decision we'd made. Over time, our conversations grew less frequent until they stopped altogether, a natural end to a chapter that had once felt all-consuming. Looking back, I realized that my time with Ethan had taught me something important about myself, about the value of the life I'd chosen and the people I cherished. I had been tempted to stray, to explore a road that seemed filled with possibility, but in the end, I had found my way back to the things that truly mattered. Sometimes it takes a reminder of what we could lose to appreciate what we have. And as I sat with my family on that ordinary Saturday, laughter filling the room, I knew that I was exactly where I was meant to be. The past, with all its complexities, was just that, the past. And my future was here, in the love and laughter that surrounded me. Over time, the weight of that past experience lifted, replaced by a renewed sense of commitment and appreciation for the life I had chosen. There was something deeply comforting about the familiar, about the love that had grown through shared memories, little sacrifices, and quiet, steady support. Tom and I found new ways to reconnect, sometimes going on weekend getaways, or making an effort to have us time once the kids were in bed. Those small gestures reminded me of the reasons I had fallen in love with him in the first place. One evening, we hosted a neighborhood barbecue, inviting friends and acquaintances, people we saw in passing but rarely spent time with. As we grilled burgers and watched the kids run around, I found myself genuinely at ease, grateful for these ordinary but meaningful moments. Among the guests, I noticed familiar faces and new ones, a reminder that life moved on and that I was no longer tethered to the pull of what might have been. Later that night, after everyone had left and the kids were asleep, Tom and I sat on the porch in the warm night air, sipping the last of the wine. He took my hand, his thumb tracing small, gentle circles on my skin. We didn't need words. There was a comfort in the silence, a mutual understanding that had grown even stronger over the past few months. It wasn't that I had forgotten about Ethan entirely. His presence lingered in my memory, not as a regret, but as a reminder of how close I had come to losing something precious. I had learned to appreciate the imperfect yet beautiful life I shared with Tom, finding solace in the stability and quiet strength of our love. In the end, life continued on in its imperfect, unpredictable way, filled with its ups and downs, laughter and challenges. But I was more certain than ever of my path, grateful for the people who made my world complete. And as Tom and I sat under the stars, hands entwined, I felt a deep, abiding peace, knowing that I was exactly where I was meant to be, with the family I cherished and the future we were building together. As the months went on, life settled back into a routine. Tom and I grew closer, and the sense of temptation that had once surrounded Ethan faded, replaced by a renewed gratitude for my family and the life we had built together. But one chilly afternoon, as autumn leaves fell from the trees, the past unexpectedly resurfaced in a way I never could have anticipated. I was tidying up the living room when the doorbell rang. I glanced at the clock, it was mid-afternoon, and I wasn't expecting anyone. Opening the door, I was surprised to find Ethan standing on my doorstep, holding a small, wrapped gift and a sheepish expression. "Hey," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. "I was in town and thought I'd stop by and check in." I felt a rush of conflicting emotions, surprise, curiosity, and a faint echo of the tension we once shared. But more than anything, I was cautious. It felt like a scene I'd long ago left behind. "Hi, Ethan," I replied, hesitating a moment before letting him in. "Come on in." We exchanged polite small talk and he handed me the gift. "It's nothing big," he said with a faint smile. "Just something I thought you'd like." Curious, I unwrapped the package. Inside was an old photograph, an image of Tom, Ethan, and me from a summer barbecue years ago, back when things were simpler. I felt a pang of nostalgia mixed with gratitude for the life I had chosen. "Thanks, Ethan," I said, touched by the thoughtfulness. "This is really nice." But as we sat down to chat, I noticed Ethan seemed different, almost subdued, like he was holding back something important. He sighed, running a hand through his hair before meeting my gaze. "There's something I need to tell you, Anna," he said, his tone serious. "I thought I could keep this to myself, but I can't." My heart skipped a beat, and I suddenly felt uneasy. "What is it?" Ethan took a deep breath, his expression filled with regret. "I didn't come back just to visit. I came to tell you I'm moving here. I got a job in the area, and I'll be here long term." My mind reeled, a sense of dread washing over me. This meant he'd be around, close enough to cross paths frequently, a constant reminder of the past and everything we'd tried to move on from. "Ethan, I don't think," but he cut me off gently. "Look, I know things were complicated before, but I've changed. I'm not here to disrupt your life, I promise. I just thought you should know before you found out some other way." I searched his face, trying to gauge his sincerity. He seemed genuine, but the mere idea of his presence nearby felt like a ripple across the peaceful surface of my life. After a long pause, I managed a nod. "Thank you for telling me. Just please respect the boundaries we've set." He nodded, a trace of relief in his expression. "Of course, Anna. I just wanted to be honest." We exchanged a few more words, and then he left, the quiet click of the door signaling his departure. I sat in the silence, emotions swirling. It was a twist I hadn't anticipated, one that left a lingering question in my mind. Could we truly leave the past behind when it was now part of our future?